It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host.
Issues facing the world today includes climate change. We talk about human rights violations, lack of access to healthcare and education. We also have insecurity issues, corruption, environmental degradation, poverty, and the likes that beset our global world today. Now, in spite of all the debates and the counter debates, we talk of all the conversations here and there. Well, it seems that all of these challenges, these problems that face the global world, seems not to be abating. Now, the question on the minds of my audience is which way to go? What are we doing wrong? And how can we get things right? Now, on the Backstory with Omobola Stephen, I am my guest. We want to offer disruptive yet constructive mindship conversation on topics and subjects related to government and politics, with other subtopics like society and culture, science and technology, the environment, and also the economy. Now, on the Backstory with Omobola Stephen, we like to shine more light on what has not worked and what will make it work. Today, I have Amanda Udis-Kessler, who is a sociologist, a writer, anti-racism trainer, and also an ethicist on the show with me today. Now, we'll be talking more about inequality and how we can get it right, especially in the United States system. Welcome with me once again, Amanda Udis-Kessler.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Good to have you on the show. It's my pleasure having you on the podcast, The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. We want to shine more light on what has not worked regarding this topic and what will make it work. Now, the podcast make it set. I'm your host, Omobola Stephen, and welcome to The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. Now, the first question I'd like for you to respond to is, why do you think that there was an inequality in the 2024 election?
I think there are many components of inequality in the 2024 election. Certainly, economic inequality played a huge role. The way that neoliberal capitalism has made the rich much richer and everyone else poorer created a situation of scarcity in which many people did not trust the Democratic Party's claims that there were good times ahead, because people were understandably stressed out about grocery prices, gas prices, things like that. So that is very important, and I don't want to ignore it. But I think something that has gone under discussed in the media in analyzing the 2024 election is the role of racism and sexism in setting up the candidates to be appealing, compelling, and plausible candidates. So on the face of it, if we did not know the race and the gender of the presidential candidates, if all we knew about was their political record, their business record, their criminal record, all of those things, you would never imagine that the election would have gone the way it went. Most people, all other things being equal, would not vote for a felon and a sexual assaulter and a basically full-time liar and someone who had fomented a rebellion and someone who had stolen government documents, right? That would not happen. So something had to happen to make Donald Trump so compelling compared to Kamala Harris that somehow all of the things he did wrong didn't matter, and all of the things she did right or didn't do wrong or tried to do right also didn't matter. He somehow was more credible than her to more people. Now, he did not win the massive majority that he claims he did. He barely won over her, but he did win legitimately. And so we have to ask, what role does inequality play in that? And I think a very important piece of it is that part of how racism and sexism work is that we carry assumptions about types of people, and we treat them in good faith or bad faith, depending on those assumptions. By good faith, I mean we give them the benefit of the doubt. We assume, all other things being equal, that they are good people who will do good things, that they are trustworthy, that they are competent, that they are moral, that they are not violent or dangerous. And so when we treat someone with good faith, or we give them the benefit of the doubt, we sort of start off on the right foot with them. If we treat someone in bad faith, or we withhold the benefit of the doubt from them, we assume ill of them. We don't believe them. We don't trust them. We maybe are afraid of them. We don't think they're competent to solve problems. And so I think that even though it is probably not the central reality of the election, part of what took Donald Trump over the top here is that people found him more credible and more trustworthy than Kamala Harris, which is shocking if you look again at the lives they've lived and the things they've done, which are well known about. And so when I look at all of that, I have to think that in the mix somewhere is the role of racism and sexism, that a woman of color or a BIPOC woman, or whatever language one wants to use, is somehow less credible, less competent, less powerful than a criminal who is, however, a white man. And so, in the United States, we elect white men over and over and over again. We've only veered from that once. It was still a man in that case. But I think this issue has gone kind of under discussed, because when people are feeling economically stressed out, when the world seems to be changing, when they think the rules that they grew up thinking were in place don't seem to be in place. And again, a lot of that is how neoliberalism and capitalism work together. But when all of that is true, people tend to revert to trusting whoever they were kind of taught to find more trustworthy. And in the United States, that's men and white people. And so Donald Trump, as a white person, managed to be more credible than someone far more competent than him. So I think we can't overstate the role of inequality. It wasn't just racism and sexism, but I think we can't ignore those pieces of the puzzle. And again, I think they have gone wildly under discussed in the public media.
But really, Amanda, I beg to differ in this regard. Do you mean to say that in our previous elections, prior to 2024 elections, that we never had inequality issues? Because when we look at previous elections, we've had Obama, President Obama, who is a man of color. So what will you say to that?
So we absolutely have had inequality in this country since before it was formally a country. We've had racism the entire time. We've had sexism the entire time. I think what made Obama more credible in his day was that at that point, the country was actually in otherwise a different situation. We had never had, because we had never had a Black president or a president of color before, he was not facing the kind of backlash that Democrats have faced since he was elected. So his election generated a storm of rage among white racist people. Now, I could say there's a sense in which all white people are racist and that we all benefit from racism. That's absolutely true. But in this case, what I'm talking about are people who think that are white people who think that people of color are less competent, less professional, less moral, less, less good. And so Obama's election may have been in some ways surprising. And it certainly marks one of the better moments of our country's history, 100%. But once it happened, immediately there was this incredible backlash among conservative white people. And that backlash led to Donald Trump's rise. And that backlash still put him back in the White House this time. So I am not for a moment blaming Obama or the Democrats for, running a Black male president. That's not at all my point. My point is that we did not realize, some of us who are white did not realize quite how violently racist the country still was until a Black man was in this position of power. And then we saw how many people hated that and resented that and felt that that was wrong. And he he certainly was not, as president, as progressive as I would have wanted him to be. I would have liked him to be more inclusive and better on certain economic issues that would help poorer people and all of that. But having said that, I don't think any reasonable objections to his presidency come from what he did. What he did was incomplete, but it wasn't particularly worse than a lot of white presidents. So I have to look at the backlash to him and think that is just racism. That is plain old racism. And that racism has now gotten joined in with conservative Christianity, with the 1% and extremely wealthy oligarchs. It has gotten sort of caught in with other cultural movements against women's rights and against immigrant well-being and so on. So I don't want to argue at all that this is kind of the most racist we've ever been per se, but it certainly is a moment in which the racist backlash to Obama has blossomed, unfortunately, into this massive, massive movement that has been aided by the 1%, has been aided by evangelical Christianity, and therefore has an incredible amount of money and power.
Right. Now, in all of this, we've been talking about systemic inequality. We have been focusing really on racism and the white people. Do you think that racism, do you think it has damaged the white people? Now, I'd like us to put this in proper perspective as regards to stereotyping.
So racism absolutely damages white people in many ways. And I want to be careful when I say that, because racism is much, much more harmful for people of color or BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous people of color, than it is for white people, in the sense that white people benefit from racism. We benefit from it in terms of our status. We benefit from it in terms of kind of finances, access to resources, life experiences, freedom from danger, all of these things. So white people benefit from racism, and we have to start there. However, racism is damaging to everyone. And here are some of the ways. First of all, when white people feel, for racist reasons, that they cannot trust people of color, that people of color are dangerous or incompetent or immoral or any of those kind of bad faith assumptions, that keeps white people from building relationships with people of color. That keeps white people separated. It keeps us locked up in fear. And I am from New York City, and I grew up in a race and class mixed neighborhood. And I have to be honest, I was taught to be afraid of people with darker skin than me. I hate that. I've worked really hard on unlearning that, but it definitely limited my life and probably still does in some ways. So white people lose out because we are afraid and we lock ourselves behind certain gates. We lose out because in a racist society, not everyone is completely invited to bring their wisdom and gifts and passion and skills and talents to the table in dealing with global problems. So I have no doubt, for example, I know a little bit about how environmental racism works, especially in urban communities of color, and the ways that those communities wind up getting targeted for environmentally dangerous industrial sites, transportation sites, things like that. So my suspicion is that people who live in those neighborhoods have incredible wisdom about what we need to do to address global climate change and environmental issues. But racism makes it harder for everyone to be around the table talking about how to fix those things. So sooner or later, and arguably already, global climate change is impacting white people. We could work on it, against it, I should say, more effectively if everyone was at the table working against it. But racism makes that really hard. The last thing I'll say to this question is that there is a spiritual harm to white people in racism. And I want to be careful not to put this in the terms of any one given religion, because I don't want to make any assumptions about the religion or lack of religion of people who are listening to the show. But But I absolutely believe that when we are taught to fear people or to hate people or to morally exclude people from our community, whatever the details of that, our souls shrink in a way. Our ability to be open to abundance and ease and grace in the most broad sense of that term gets shut down because of our psychological fears or because of our intellectual assumptions and the sort of the discrimination that can go with them and the kind of patronizing feelings that can go with things like that. All of those things lead people who benefit from inequality to be more arrogant, to be more kind of self-assured in certain ways. And really, all of us grow better spiritually, whatever that looks like individually. We all grow better spiritually when we are humble and when we are open to making emotional and personal connections with people who are different from us, when we acknowledge that other people have things to teach us. And racism and other kinds of inequality really mitigate against that humility and that openness, because let's say I really have been taught that white people are kind of intellectually competent in a way that other people are not. If I have been taught that, I don't think I have anything to learn from the lives or experiences or research or writings or cultural productions of members of BIPOC communities. And therefore my life is shrunk a little bit, but also my trust is shrunk a little bit. And my capacity for wonder is shrunk a little bit. So yes, I think racism absolutely harms white people, even as it oppresses BIPOC people or people of color.
Now, looking at how Kamala Harris lost the election to President Donald Trump, we're still talking about the inequality issues facing the U.S. economy, U.S. country in general. Now, we still have poor representation of women in leadership roles. Now, who do you fault for this inequality, and how can we build the divide?
So the problem right now, I think, in terms of working against inequality, is that overwhelmingly people in positions of power around the country and people who lead institutions that shape how we think about things, so say major newspapers or major media outlets, are basically fomenting inequality. They are going along with these ideas and these values that that perpetuate inequality. So anyone who, for example, does not, let's not say anyone. Let's say, for example, major media outlets, so large newspapers or large social media organizations, when they simply go along with reporting on what the new administration is doing without commenting on it and without pointing out how it's harmful, what they're doing is basically supporting it. And so right now that the challenge to kind of breaking down inequality in a very large scale way across the country is that overwhelmingly, not exclusively, but overwhelmingly, people in power are supporting these kinds of inequality. So, for example, the president's office is shutting down diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the government and trying really hard to find ways to shut them down in other venues like higher education and so on. And so I think what would have to happen for us to begin to turn more effectively toward supporting equality again is it's going to have to happen very much at grassroots levels. People like you and me, everyday people, are going to have to use their skills, their energy, their resources, their voices, their social media connections, to keep saying that what is happening is wrong, to keep saying that harming immigrants is wrong, to keep saying that harming women is wrong, that devaluing BIPOC communities is wrong. We are going to have to basically become kind of prophets in a corrupt and unjust system. And I think that can happen. We've actually already seen a really good example of this that happened in the public eye when the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., so this is the Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Budde, in her sermon to the new administration included a plea to the president to have mercy on those who were afraid. And the people she talked about mostly were immigrants and lesbians and gay people. And so she took a very courageous stand, for which she has, by the way, been getting death threats, which is horrible, but not unfortunately surprising. But when people who have kind of any public authority, any access to public media, any kind of audience, when those people say, what is happening is wrong, it is morally wrong, it harms people, it causes unnecessary suffering, it makes our country a worse place, it makes us the laughing stock of most of the world, we need to fight back against it, and we need, as much as possible, to keep it from getting worse. When enough people do that, there will, in fact, be some possibility of things not getting as bad as they could possibly get. So every time someone stands up and says, this is wrong, and someone else says, that's very powerful and inspiring, I want to stand up and say this is wrong, there is a possibility for more people to be part of the resistance to this inhumane and unequal movement. And having said that, in the short term, it is going to be more individuals and people with kind of local cultural power, like an Episcopal bishop who has no lawmaking authority, but who does have moral and spiritual authority as a religious leader. And so that, my hope right now, that's where my hope is. It's with any of us who stand up and take the risk of saying, we can and must do better than this.
Thank you, Madam, for sharing your thoughts on this important topic of discussion. Because really, you are an ethicist. And now I'd like us to talk about ethics and morality. What does ethics and morality, what does it have to do with the issue of racism and other forms of systemic inequality that is happening in the world today, especially in the US?
I am so glad you asked that, because that is a topic very dear to my heart. So in addition to my book last year, Cultural Processes of Inequality, which is kind of mostly what we're talking about today, I also wrote a book published by a religious press that discusses a way of thinking about ethics that is not very common. It might be completely new, it might just not be very common, but in which the point of ethics is for people, all people, to flourish, to get to have good lives. And so in that book, I say that we have spent a long time thinking about ethics and morality in two ways. One of them is in terms of these principles like freedom or justice or equality. And those are not bad things, but they have limitations. And one of the limitations is two different people can appeal to freedom and be talking about two completely different things, and what those two different people want can have really different impacts on human well-being. The freedom for same-sex couples to marry harms no one and makes the lives of those couples and the people who love them better. So arguably, that's a kind of freedom that's good. However, the freedom to own a gun with virtually no restrictions on how many guns you own, how you store them, how you use them, the ability to open carry, all of those kinds of things actually wind up harming people. So in the US, we have way more gun deaths than any other developed industrialized nation. And one of the reasons is that we are unwilling to put sensible regulations in place to limit gun access to people who should not have access to guns. We are unwilling in many parts of the country to limit how people handle or carry guns. And all of this makes it more likely that people will use guns violently. So that is a kind of freedom that's problematic. So if you say to me, I believe in freedom, I will say, I believe in freedom when it serves human well-being, when it helps people have good lives. When freedom is used to harm people, when freedom is used to discriminate against people, So the deregulation of the government and the ending of DEI programs is basically an exercise in freedom, but it's an exercise in the freedom to discriminate and cause harm. So the first thing I'd say about ethics is we have to be really careful when we appeal to principles like freedom, because they can turn out to be good for us or bad for us. When we talk about rights, there's similarly a problem. When we look at the issue of abortion access, some people say that in terms of women's rights, women need access to safe, legal, and affordable abortion. Whereas other people say the fetus needs the right to be born, and that supersedes the woman's right. So we can't just appeal to rights in a broad way. We have to ask whose rights we're talking about and what impact our discourse is going to have on human well-being. So that's part one. The other part I would say about ethics, the other rejection I want to make is of any ethics that is based on a long list of rules of things you can do, things you must do, things you can't do. Those are problematic because anytime we propose a set of universal rules about how to behave, we are missing cultural diversity. We are missing the fact that in different parts of this country and indeed in different countries, there are different values. And so we need a way to think about ethics that is loose enough and broad enough to include different people who have very different lives and very different values, but that also maintains some kind of core of integrity. And for me, the core of integrity is around beliefs, actions, organizations, institutions that help people live good lives versus those that cause harm. And the very last thing for now that I'll say about this is the idea of having a good life can sound very vague and broad. And if when I said that you thought, well, what does she mean by having a good life? I would not be at all surprised because it is a very broad statement. And so in this other book, this ethics book of mine, the other thing I do is lay out some aspects or attributes of humanity that are universal. We are all embodied. We are emotional creatures. We all need to make sense of the world. We all have a drive to learn things and grow. We need to act in the world in ways that make us feel like we're making a difference, and so on. There are 10 attributes that I discuss in the book. And we can look at human well-being or human suffering in terms of those attributes. So it actually becomes very concrete. And when I talk about this, what I usually talk about is embodiment, because it is completely non-negotiable that all human beings have bodies. Our bodies are sources of pleasure and pain. Our bodies are how we have agency in the world. When our bodies die, we die. Our bodies can be strong and powerful. They can also be harmed. And in terms of inequality, different people's bodies get different amounts of respect. So if I go walking in the street and you go walking in the street, my body might well be safer than your body because I'm not going to be subject to racist harassment and violence. But if both of us go walking in the street with, say, a male friend, that male friend may be safer than either of us because that male friend is not going to be subject to sexist harassment. So there are very concrete ways in which our bodies flourish and suffer, and those have a lot to do with inequality. When Black and African American and Hispanic people are policed more heavily than white people, they are at more risk of police violence. So, I might get stopped for speeding, but the odds that a police officer is going to find me a threat and kill me are very, very, very low unless I'm behaving in some highly irregular way. Whereas Black, African American, Hispanic, mixed race people get that all the time. So inequality is immoral. It's unethical because it causes suffering and it makes it harder for people on the devalued side of the inequality to flourish. I could talk about this for hours, but I think for us, for the moment, that's as complete an answer as I can give relatively quickly.
And now, why have you written a book that is focused on the cultural processes of inequality? And how do you think that these processes are going to work?
So I wrote the book. I've wanted to write this book for decades. If I'm honest, I partly wrote the book because a particular academic press was sort of pursuing me and wanted me to write a book. And I thought, this is the book I'm equipped to write right now, and it's dear to my heart. I used to be a college professor and teach sociology, so I love the idea of educating people about how sociology works. So those are kind of some of the reasons I wrote the book. I'm really hoping that once the book comes out in paperback and is therefore affordable, people outside of classrooms might also interact with it. Right now, it's not really, as a hardcover, it's not really affordable for most people, unfortunately, which was not my decision. But then in terms of how I think these processes work, beyond what I've already said, I think we can think of it as a kind of cycle. Sociologists are very interested in cycles, in how society creates people and people create society, in how assumptions lead to actions that then reinforce the assumptions, that kind of thing. And so let's think about someone who is being treated well in the world and being given a chance to succeed. Perhaps this is because they're white or they're male or they're heterosexual, whatever. When someone is treated well and they recognize that they're being treated well, that empowers them to try to do their best. So someone who is treated well, given the benefit of the doubt, treated in good faith, given access to resources and opportunities and so on, unless there's something else going on in their life that makes them, I don't know, self-destructive, for example, most people who are not in a personally bad place will look at these opportunities and look at this good treatment and go, I'm going to go do the best I can. And when someone like that succeeds, and when their success is visible publicly, that confirms to other people all of the positive assumptions that those people already had about them. So we're not surprised. And by we, okay, well, let's say white people are not surprised when a white person succeeds at a job because they expect them to succeed. But if someone is not given the benefit of the doubt, if the expectations of some person are that they're going to be incompetent or immoral or untrustworthy or dangerous, and they get treated badly, so they don't get access to resources, they don't receive the mortgage loan for their house, or their house is appraised at a much lower amount, let's say, but because they're African American, let's say, they recognize that they are being treated badly, and that is an assault on their dignity. And that may lead them to get angry, to withdraw, to be resentful, with all of which is reasonable. I mean, I can't argue with that response. But as a result of that, if someone is treated badly long enough and they get the message that society doesn't value them, and that maybe society doesn't trust them, or society fears them, or society doesn't think they're competent, they may just kind of disengage and kind of move into ways of thinking or being or acting that salvage their dignity, but don't really look good to the rest of the world. So something I have tracked a little bit is how racism in the educational system in the US, especially before college, so, you know, high school particularly, when racism in high school venues devalues young people of color, and they respond to that by checking out and not staying really academically focused, that is a really reasonable response. But then that confirms to their teachers or to the world around them that they weren't that invested or that they weren't that smart. That's not fair. That's morally horrible that that happens. But I do think there is this kind of cycle in which the assumptions we bring to our relationships with people, both in an individual interaction, but also in kind of institutional context like school or trying to get a mortgage loan or interacting with the criminal justice system or interacting with the healthcare system, good assumptions lead to good outcomes. Good outcomes, when visible, then confirm the positive assumptions, and those people keep getting to have good lives. Bad assumptions can lead to bad outcomes, which can then confirm the bad assumptions. And thus inequality gets reproduced generation to generation. And it's not that it doesn't change at all, but it's very hard to change it at its core because of these assumptions that keep discrimination, say, in place.
Thank you, Amanda, for that. Do you have any exciting news? Perhaps you have an important project that you are working on the plate at the moment. You think the audience of the Backstory with Omobola Stephen can benefit from. This is the right time for you to share, if there's any.
Sure. So the couple of books that I'm working on now, this may turn into a single project, but maybe I'll say, instead of a couple of books, I'll say the couple of big themes I'm working on right now are, what should people who feel really disempowered in the US in the face of this administration, what should we do now in order to live ethically and to continue to sort of cultivate our own psychological and spiritual growth? What does that look like, and how do we think about ourselves? So that's one project I'm working on. Another project that may wind up getting kind of brought into the first project is my ethics book last year was called Abundant Lives. That was the title of it. And it talks much more about flourishing than about abundance. But when I look at our society right now, the biggest kind of notable gap for me is the gap between seeing the world from a position of scarcity and seeing it from a position of abundance. The people who are angry about immigrants getting access to the country, the people who are angry about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in short, the people who elected Donald Trump are people who have a scarcity mentality, in the sense that they say, we can't all have good lives, and your success threatens my success. And when I say your and my, what I mean in this case is, these are, say, white men saying women's success in the workplace, or the access of BIPOC people of color to the workplace, is a threat to me because it means there's more competition for a job that should be my job. So there is this assumption. It rarely gets really discussed, but this idea that certain jobs are kind of the prerogative or birthright of white men, and that it's unfair for anyone else to have access to them. And so, when someone opposes diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things they're likely to say is, well, those people took my job. And I'm very interested in that assumption that, that it was your job in the first place. So there's this scarcity mentality that we can't afford to have immigrants in the country because the country does not have enough resources for immigrants. That's nonsense. We are, if not the wealthiest country in the world, one of them. We might even still be the wealthiest country, I'm not sure. Of course we have resources for everyone, but not everyone can have those resources if some people are hoarding them. So I think there is a tremendous conversation to have about broad mindsets around scarcity and abundance. And what I think we would have to do to move to a mindset of abundance is to say, and this does come back to my books from last year, all people ought to get to have good lives. All people ought to be part of the moral community that we care about, that we will treat well. And it is absolutely clear from the campaign and from the actions of the new president and his administration in the first few days, it is absolutely clear that they are operating from a model of scarcity. It is absolutely clear that they want only certain people to have good lives. They do not want you or me or people who disagree with them to have good lives. They do not want poor people to have good lives. They do not want non-Christians to have good lives. They do not want women to have good lives, except perhaps, under the thumb of men, which I don't think is a good life. So right now I am thinking a lot about abundance and scarcity, and I'm thinking a lot about what our opportunities and moral obligations are to resist this administration in a loving way that does not stoop to their exclusionary tactics. I find this very hard, but it is what I'm thinking about.
Right, good to know. Thank you for sharing that information with my audience, Amanda. I sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate your thoughts and your view, and also wish you best of luck in the projects that you embark upon. Can you share your social media handles and your website so that we can connect and learn what you've been up to?
Absolutely. So I have two websites. One of them is where all of my writing projects are housed. And also there's a free kind of backlog of writings of mine on that. That website is https://AmandaUdis-Kessler.com. So that's AMANDAUDISKESSLER.com. And so everything we've been talking about is there. We haven't talked about this, I also have a rich life as a writer of progressive religious music. And if anyone in your audience is interested in encountering progressive, justice-focused, inclusive religious music, my website is queersacredmusic.com. So that's https://QUEERSACREDMUSIC.com. And everything on both websites is freely available. The books are not freely available. I can't do that. But there are all sorts of printouts, essays, sermons, liturgies available on my writing website. There's at least one chapter from one book on that website. And the music website has scores, recordings, videos of over 150 pieces that I've written in the last few years that churches use around the country. And everything on the music website is completely free use. So while I absolutely welcome and appreciate donations when appropriate, anyone could go to that website and watch a video of a song or listen to a song or look at a score if they really wanted. So that's where you can find me. I'm on Facebook and Blue Sky, in both cases under my name, so you can look up my name. And I welcome interacting with any of your audience and hearing their thoughts and suggestions and objections and whatever else they may have.
Absolutely. Thank you once again for sharing that with my audience. Really, Amanda, Udis-Kessler, it's really been a worthwhile time having this discussion with you, especially talking about inequality, the systemic inequality that is bedeviling the United States of America, such a time as this, and the way forward. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, for offering your valuable time to the audience of the Backstory. We sincerely wish you best of luck in all the projects that you embark upon now and in subsequent future. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
It's been the Backstory with Omobola Stephen. I'm your host, Omobola Stephen, the Backstory with Omobola Stephen. Now, if you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the show, you can catch up on any podcast distribution platforms or any podcast and promotion platforms or any Facebook community you bump into online, any social media community. Just search for the Backstory with Omobola Stephen, and do have a great time as you listen to topics or subjects on the government and politics, society and culture, science and technology, the environment, and also the economy. I wish you best of luck with always, Amanda Udis-Kessler, for your time once again. Now, I need to stay safe. I talk to you soon.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.